here and point people to something that is taking place in front of our eyes, where I think many people, traditional leftists, are finding themselves bizarrely excluded, self-excluded from their own revolution that they've been waiting for. So I've been watching Chomsky, who I've been shaking my head at for many, many months, because he embraced the authoritarian nonsense, not in the strongest terms, but my sense is here you've got a guy who believes in collectivist viewpoint, hearing about a collective action problem, right? The problem of vaccination, and embracing what seemed to him, I'm sure, to be the scientifically responsible collectivist answer to this. And here he is now on the opposite side of this organic workers' protest that is in fact quite international across the entire West, right? You have these protests against mandates. And so you have icons of the progressive left who are now opposite of the actual workers who are revolting from what appears to be the center right. And I wanted to put this in context because if you use...
Fascinating, incidentally, that the so-called working class should be identified as center-right, when it has forever, at least in the United States, been the core voter base of the Democrats.
Right. Now, my claim is that actually this does make very simple sense if you just simply track the parameters correctly, right? And that what's happening is a lot of people are using a heuristic, right? Like, well, if it's on the right, it's bad. You know,
right.
But what's really happening, so I've heard, and you've heard, and we've all heard hundreds of people say, you know, left and right isn't really such a useful distinction anymore. It's authoritarian versus libertarian, for example. And no doubt there are other schemes that matter, but I don't think we should give up on left and right. I think it still matters. And if you map it correctly here, you'll see what's going on. So my claim is going to be that what defines the left is that it is biased in the direction of attempting to make progress. And what defines the right is that it is resistant to attempts to make progress on the basis that unintended consequences are an ever-present risk. And so the question is, why is it that the workers are on the right now? In part, what's happened is good governance is something that the left is favorable towards, right? This is a sympathy I have. Good governance is an important fact of civilization functioning. The government has been captured. All of our governments have been captured by economic forces that exceed anything that our founders could have envisioned, right? They couldn't envision the internet or economies of the scale or the kind of interdependence. And so the point is those feedbacks captured the government and put it in the hands of powerful interests, which means that what could be good governance is actually not good governance at all. It's governance being used against the people by those who have captured it, right? And we could go into why those people would be against the public, but basically the point is, look, anything that corporations want that's also good for the people, it's already done, right? That means what's left for us to fight over are the things that would go one way if they were in the interest of the people, and they would go the other way if they were in the interest of the corporations, which is, of course, why they have corrupted these systems, was in order to get things done that aren't good for the people. So,
and it's part of why the idea of a private-public partnership puts so much fear into our hearts, because we know that what is meant by public there is not us, it's the government.
Right.
And at the point that the private-public partnership gets invoked, it is the people who are out of the loop and who are not benefiting.
Right. It's it's private in public clothing, right? It's the wolf in sheep's clothing is the problem.
No. A private-public partnership is actually private corporations with actually supposedly public institutions, which are the government.
Right, but in this case, the public institutions have been captured. And so it's really the puppet masters are operating through both the private and they are operating through the public, which they captured. And
I mean, I think that's just a different way of saying the same thing. The idea is that the public, government is supposed to exist for the people, not the other way around. And this is a point that's been made in England with regard to the NHS and in Canada and the US as well, that we are not The idea that we need to do things in order to protect, for instance, the health system. Like, no, the health system exists for us. We don't exist for it. The government exists for us. We don't exist for it. But at the point that the government decides that it has its own agency, it's the AI revolution that we've been dreading in different clothing.
Right, and it's no accident that it's aligned with these interests that are out of phase with what's good for the public. But in any case, what I want to get at is, I think I said last week that that conservatives are always in the business of defending the gains of past liberals. That is to say, liberals push towards progress.
You didn't say it quite that strongly. You said maybe.
Well, I don't want. Maybe I shouldn't even say always, because there are obviously weird phases of history.
But say it again without quite.
That conservatives defend the past gains of liberals. Liberals push towards progress. Some of that progress is foolish to pursue because the unintended consequences will be bad. So there's a tension between conservatism resisting the unintended consequences and liberalism pushing towards solution making that can be done. And what we have, the fact that civilization works at all, is essentially by definition the result of progressives having actually pushed towards progress that was possible, made lots of mistakes along the way, which presumably were largely rolled back. But we have a functional system.
But in the 20th century, we got workers' rights and children's rights and women's rights and civil rights and gay rights and on, and disabled rights and on and on and on and on. Those are the ones that come to mind right away. All of these rights that I think in all of those cases are actively being dismantled by some branches of so-called liberalism. And it's the conservatives who are standing up and saying, wait, no, we keep those. And what they are arguing to keep is exactly what the liberals were fighting for anything from 10 to 100 years ago.
Right, and even more than 100 years ago.
Yeah,
so I would argue that the founders, our American founders, were radicals, right? They had a radical idea about good governance, and they inscribed it into our founding documents. And the point is that you can see on the Department of Homeland Security's site that they do not have that same opinion of those founding documents, right? That they have an antipathy for those founding documents, is some force rolling back the gains of past liberals, right? And the point is, this is the natural role of conservatives, is to oppose it, right? And the real mystery here is, okay, what are the progressives doing, right? They should be pointing towards solving new problems. They should not be on the side of unmaking the solutions to problems that we've already solved. But what's happened is they have effectively been bought off. That the corrupt governmental structure has offered people who are feeling shafted something. And what they've offered them is they've offered to redistribute the well-being that exists among working people at various different levels. This is why the left is targeting people, right? They have been offered, you can savage those people and you can have their stuff, right? If you leave the rent-seeking elites alone.
Yeah.
Right? So the left is now a regressive force, right? It is not a progressive force. It is not a conservative force. It is a regressive force. And in the face of a regressive left, you would expect conservatives to defend the gains of past liberals, which is what we're seeing. And the really interesting thing is that some people see this, right? Glenn Greenwald sees it, but Noam Chomsky doesn't, right? And that tells us something, which is that you can't use these superficial labels. You have to look deeper into the puzzle.